This is Politics and Media 101. I'm Jeff Browning. Michael Kugelman has written for the New York Times and Foreign Policy and is a student of Pakistan, including its relationship with the United States. Pakistan has a very young population. It's located between India, China, Iran, and Afghanistan. And since 2018, its prime minister has been Imran Khan, a former cricket star who ran on a platform of anti-corruption. You may have seen stories in the news lately about political turmoil in Pakistan. Opposition in parliament took steps to remove the prime minister. The prime minister fought back. There was a Supreme Court ruling. And ultimately last night, on Sunday, just before we released this episode, the prime minister was removed, paving the way for new elections in which he could potentially run again. When we recorded this conversation last week, it was just before the Supreme Court case. Ultimately, the Supreme Court did make a decision that paved the way for him to be removed. We talked to Michael about all of this, about Pakistan's relationship with the United States, and about opportunities and challenges that have arisen as part of that relationship, from the Cold War through today. As a reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a longer conversation that was taped live with audience questions. For information on how to join us and past episodes, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take 2 seconds to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now so you don't miss our next episode on Wednesday, featuring Glenn Kirshner, who's a lawyer and former Army prosecutor. Without any further ado, let's roll the tape.
Can you tell us about how a Playboy, globetrotting sports star remade himself into a conservative, religious, political figure and became prime minister of the 5th largest country in the world that's also a nuclear power?
Soon after finishing his heroic athletic career, he joined politics in 1996. And one of the things that he did, he identified the issue of anti-corruption as a signature issue that would stay with him as his big focus for him and later for the party that he formed, which really translates to the Pakistani Justice Party. In focusing on this issue of anti-corruption, he also was capitalizing on a grievance harbored by a very key component of the Pakistani electorate, that being conservative, young, middle-class urbanites, many of whom had long been disgusted with what they perceived to be this ossified, dynastic, corrupt political elite that controlled politics in Pakistan for many years. And so Imran Khan formed a completely new political party, and it was not dynastic, it was not corrupt, and he used that and he also, of course, leveraged his celebrity status as a cricket star. And then he did a number of other things. He became a more religious, more pious man. He took on a much more conservative politics that included some pretty strong criticism of U.S. and Western policies, particularly U.S. policies in Afghanistan and the war in Afghanistan and drone strikes and all of that. He became, not just in Pakistan, but one of the world's most articulate but also virulent critics of those policies. And finally, what he did, and this is really essential as well in Pakistani politics, he changed his position toward the military in Pakistan. He had been very critical of military dictatorship, including that led by Pervez Musharraf for a number of years. But then he eventually changed direction and reached out to the military and became very pro-military, which is very important in Pakistan if you want to make it high up as a civilian politician, just because of how powerful the military is. And so he became prime minister, or he he participated in the 2013 election in Pakistan. He did not win, he did not do very well, but that's what really brought him a big name. And then he came back in the 2018 election and he won it. Many people believe that the reason he won it is that he got a lot of help from the military in the weeks and months leading up to the election, in that the military quietly engineered an election environment that worked to Khan's advantage, such as by persuading parliamentarians to throw their lot in with his party, pressuring TV stations not to broadcast coverage of other candidates besides Imran Khan. And anyway, that helped him get elected. Of course, his supporters say that he was simply so popular.
So, Michael, we know that Pakistan is quite regionally divided, and the politics of Pakistan have often been quite regional. We've got Sindh and Punjab as the two major population anchors of the country. And the two traditional political parties kind of competed out of a support base in those regions. But Imran Khan, as you said, he had an upstart political career where he came in with a new party, a new political movement, and was able to win a majority to govern from parliament. So what is the support base for Imran Khan? Is it cross-regional? Is it cross-ethnic? Is it cross-class lines? What is the actual base of people that voted and supported his new political movement?
So the first thing is that his party controlled a government in a province called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is in the northwest bordering Afghanistan. So his government had been in control there for a number of years, and so he was able to draw support from that area. But more broadly speaking, his party was also able to draw considerable amounts of support in urban areas of Punjab. And Punjab is a critical province. It's the most populous province of Pakistan. It's the most affluent. It's also where the army tends to draw its strength from. Many of the higher officer classes of the army are from Punjab. They're ethnic Punjabis. I don't want to draw too much of a simplistic analogy, but think of it sort of like a California of Pakistani politics. A lot of people there, a lot of wealth, a lot of affluence. And it's also a very urban province compared to Baluchistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and even Sindh, the other province. One of the other major long-standing political parties in Pakistan, which is the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, the PMLN party, that party also has traditionally drawn its main strength and has had its main bastions in Punjab. So there are some pretty competitive battles between the PMLN and Imran Khan's PTI party in Punjab for local elections, provincial elections for a number of years. And one of the reasons why Imran Khan won the 2018 election is that he was able to triumph in Punjab. But the governing coalition that Imran Khan's party had in parliament over the last few years was a very tenuous, small majority. It barely managed to get a majority in that 2018 election. So that shows that even though his party did get a majority, it was tough and it was heavily contested. And in the end, it had to bring together a rather interesting group of coalition partners.
How free and fair are the elections vis-a-vis what we in the U.S. perceive as free and fair elections?
Unfortunately, there is a pretty long legacy of rigging and other election irregularities in Pakistan. I would say on levels of intensity much more so than you would have, for instance, in the United States, but not any more so that you've had in India, for example, over the years. And of course, India has been a democracy for its entire modern existence. And another constraint that Pakistan has had with elections is just that the military has been so powerful and has been everywhere. Until relatively recently, it was always a threat to take over. It doesn't do that anymore. In recent years, it's learned that it's better to pull the strings or to try to pull the strings from behind the scenes while letting the civilian leaders be the public face for the government and take the fall and be the fall guy when policies don't succeed. Pakistan has come a long way in terms of democratization in recent years. I mean, there have been successive, peaceful, democratic civilian transfers of power, too, in fact. There has not been a military government in a number of years, not since 2008, which is by far the longest period of time in Pakistan where you've had a civilian elected democratic government, even if there's questions about how it was elected. So I think that's a big change, and that says something for how Pakistan has been able to democratize in ways that it had not in its earlier years of existence.
Khan lost a vote of no confidence in Parliament on Sunday after being deserted by coalition partners. After a 13-hour session beset by delays, the presiding Speaker of the lower house announced the result of the vote.
174 members have recorded their votes in favor of the resolution. Consequently, the resolution for vote of no confidence against Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, has been passed by a majority of the total membership of the National Assembly.
Two sources said the voting came after Khan met with the country's powerful army chief, as criticism mounted over delays in the parliamentary process. Analysts said there were signs that Khan had lost the support of the army, which has ruled the country for nearly half of its 75-year history. Khan instead insists he's a victim of an international conspiracy claiming the United States wanted him gone for his recent foreign policy moves, including a trip to Moscow to meet President Vladimir Putin. Washington has rejected the charge, but it has resonated with Khan's supporters, who also took to the streets of Islamabad following the vote.
So, Michael, when you were describing Imran Khan's rise to power in Pakistan, you suggested that that was made possible because it was broadly understood that he had some degree of support from the military, that the military approved of him as a potential prime minister, head of government for the country. However, it also seems as though this no confidence vote, the move inside of parliament to take Imran Khan down, was also only possible because the military seemed to approve of that action. So somewhere along the line, Imran Khan has lost the support of the military, who, as you've identified, are a key player inside of Pakistan's political system. So how exactly did that happen? What did Imran do to lose the support of the military?
I would argue that the military is not a monolith in Pakistan, and I'm not sure that I would say that Imran Khan completely lost the support of the military as an institution. He did lose the support of the army chief, which I'll get into, and I think he also lost the support of some other senior military figures, but he continues to have the support of a number of other senior military leaders, including a guy, really important figure these days in Pakistani politics, a guy named Faiz Hamid, who's a general and had been, until relatively recently, the head of the ISI, the main Pakistani intelligence agency. Very close relationship to Imran that continues to now. The Pakistani military tends to prefer civilian prime ministers or civilian leaders who are willing to defer, who are willing to be exploited, who are willing to let the military walk over them if it comes to that, who are willing to acquiesce in the military, occupying much more policy space than would typically be the case in a democracy. But Imran Khan is not known for deferring. He has a very strong personality. He's very stubborn. He likes to do things his way. There's sort of a cult of personality effect about him. So that's a bit of a surprise. That gets to the question of where did things go wrong? How did he lose the support of key military leaders? I think you have to go back to an incident that happened in November of last year when Imran Khan took issue with the way in which the army chief went about overseeing the process to bring in a new intelligence chief. And then what happened is in more recent weeks, he began to take on a particularly strong anti-West, anti-U.S. position. And this is not new, as I had said before. He's a populist politician. He's long played on the prevailing anti-U.S. sentiment in Pakistan, especially toward U.S. policies. But he really ramped that up. He took offense at how a group of EU ambassadors in Islamabad released a statement criticizing Khan for having visited Russia at the very moment when Putin was invading Ukraine. He went on a rampage about that, saying, are we slaves? Or are we, and he actually, that's the term he used. Are we slaves? Are we expected to do what the Europeans want us to do? And then, of course, this then brought the situation to more recent days when he started accusing the U.S. government of colluding with the opposition to try to oust him. And this was concerning for the military, just because these days, at least, the army chief and many senior leaders in the Pakistani military, they see value in maintaining good relations, not just with the U.S., but with the West on the whole. And not just because of security cooperation, but because of trade cooperation. The West is a key export market. The EU and the U.S., key export market for a Pakistani economy that is always floundering, especially now. So I think that many in the military thought that Khan went too far with that rhetoric and that sentiment. And so that gets us to where we are today, where he's lost the support of the army chief and a number of other military officials. His closest ally in the military establishment, Faiz Hamid, is no longer the ISI director. He's been transferred to a corps commander position in Peshawar. But, we don't know. There certainly could be other military leaders that are still with him as well. It's unclear. But that's where things stand today.
So, Michael, you talked about how the Pakistani military are concerned about the U.S. relationship. There's quite a legacy of U.S.-Pakistani military cooperation, that Pakistan and the U.S. were aligned during the Cold War, that the U.S. supported Pakistan in conflicts like 1971, and that as recently as the post 9/11 years, the U.S. designated Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally, which gave them access to a higher level of military cooperation. But we know that the Afghanistan war really damaged that level of trust and that relationship, and that in recent years, there's been an effort to kind of pull back a little bit of the support, aid, weapons transfers that the U.S. had been giving to Pakistan for so long. So what's the status of that relationship today? Is there still a level of cooperation between the U.S. and Pakistani military?
Military to military cooperation has been both a source of success and also tension within the relationship, because the two militaries have worked closely together, but they've also angered each other a lot. It was the military, the ISI, that was backing the Taliban, and especially the Haqqani network, which was, attacking Americans every day. And yet we were looking for the Pakistanis, or the U.S. government was looking for the Pakistanis to help us participate in this counterterrorism alliance that the U.S. government had concluded with Pervez Musharraf soon after the 9/11 attacks. So it was a real mess. For so many years, Washington had looked at the relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan. With the U.S. having left Afghanistan, that puts Pakistan in an awkward place, because I think that the two are in a position where they need to find a new anchor for the relationship. But I think that Washington is not necessarily interested in that. Pakistan would prefer that the U.S. be willing to rebrand and really reset the relationship in a way that could emphasize things like trade cooperation and investment and things like that. The U.S. is not opposed to that. It just has much bigger priorities that lie elsewhere. Another constraint is geopolitical, that, both the U.S. and Pakistan have very close relationships with the other's biggest rivals, right? The U.S. has been deepening ties with India for many years. Pakistan has long been very close to China, and it's been moving even closer to it in recent years, as Chinese investments have really flowed into Pakistan in a big way as part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. There have been efforts to see whether Pakistan would be interested in providing various forms of support to the United States, from new intelligence type arrangements to possibly and controversially basing arrangements, allowing U.S. forces to actually be based in Pakistan, to use Pakistani soil as staging grounds for counterterrorism activities in Pakistan. There's some that say that those negotiations never happened. At any rate, none of that bore fruit.
Could you explain why the government was dissolved? What does the question in front of, I believe it's the Supreme Court, actually mean? And do you think there's just going to be another election, or are we going to get the military stepping in here?
Pakistan had not been scheduled to have an election until next year. The opposition sensed an opportunity. They wanted to go for the kill. So they put together this no confidence motion that was justified on what they described as economic misgovernance and corruption within the government. But then, Imran Khan was very clever. He had the deputy speaker of the assembly make the argument that the no confidence motion was discredited, illegitimate, because it was supported by the U.S. government, and that the U.S. government was working with the political opposition to put forward this no confidence motion to oust him. And therefore, Khan was able to invoke a constitutional clause, a loyalty clause, Article 5 of the Pakistani Constitution, which states very simply and innocuously that everyone must be loyal to the state. Parliamentarians must be loyal to the state. And so Khan's argument was that by voting in favor of the no confidence motion, you would be disloyal to the state, because you would be participating in a motion, in a process that had been bankrolled, sponsored by the U.S. government. And so because of that argument, Deputy Speaker of the House, who was a Khan ally, basically annulled the no confidence vote. He said it's not going to happen because it's discredited. After that happened, Imran Khan then dissolved parliament. And the Constitution states that you're not allowed to dissolve parliament once a no confidence motion has been introduced. But because Khan was able to get the motion annulled, it was no longer there. And so he was then able to dissolve parliament, and his government ceased to function. And the opposition is, of course, furious, not just because they failed to bring out this no confidence vote that they were sure that they would be successful with, but also they're now being branded as traitors by Khan and by his party and his supporters for having allegedly colluded with the United States. And in Pakistan, if you're accused of being a traitor, that's an extremely dangerous and potentially deadly charge. So it's made the political environment is incredibly poisoned right now. The opposition brought a legal challenge to the Supreme Court, basically saying that what Khan did was illegal, asking for it to be reversed.
Regarding the Supreme Court, is it an independent judiciary? We've mentioned the influence that the military has potentially over engineering elections and creating environments. What influence does the military have on the Supreme Court? And is it a true independent judiciary?
You look in some of the recent years how several different Pakistani civilian prime ministers have been disqualified from power, forced to leave, typically coming after rulings by the Supreme Court that clearly had been pressured by the military to act. In more recent years, I'm not sure if the military has been quite as meddling in the Supreme Court. The court has been able to assert its independence, which I think, again, is another sign of the democratization that Pakistan has been able to see through. But now, since it appears that the military had initially stepped back and let the opposition move forward with a no confidence vote, suggesting that the military would be perfectly fine seeing Imran Khan lose his job, the military also, however, did not do anything to prevent Khan doing what he did on Sunday to essentially disallow that no confidence vote, which suggests that the military is perhaps really trying to be a neutral power force and not meddling as it has so many times. And that suggests that it would not want to meddle in whatever the Supreme Court is doing. But I'd like to think that in this case, the court will make an independent decision, not one that is influenced by the military or any other entity. As I had said before, it's basically the same situation, no matter what happens, right? That the current government is done for now. There's supposed to be a caretaker government that comes in a few days to be in charge until the elections happen in 90 days.
Despite huge strides to wipe out polio around the world, the crippling virus still haunts a few places. One of them is Pakistan, where there have recently been a series of attacks on those trying to administer vaccines.
Neighboring India was certified polio-free in 2012.
The fact that they've done it is what makes me think that we can do it. If you can put enough boots on the ground and do high-quality campaigns. Because if India can do it, Pakistan can do it.
But in Pakistan, the polio campaign began to stall, and there was one more unexpected setback.
We developed more information about the possibility that we had located bin Laden hiding within a compound deep inside Pakistan.
One part of that intelligence gathering was a fake vaccine campaign in the neighborhood around the Al-Qaeda leader's compound, used to gather DNA samples.
Which has hugely damaged public health programs, not only in Pakistan, but in many, many countries, because people ask all kinds of questions. They now think that the vaccine programs might be actually spy operations.
If prime minister and a government lose a no confidence vote, you have a new election on the horizon. And Imran, by blocking the no confidence vote, has tried to set up new elections. So you've probably got new elections coming up one way or the other, right? And just like you said, the government gets dissolved either way. So is there really huge importance in the decision that the Supreme Court makes?
Yeah, that's a good point, but I think it's more so whether the way in which Imran Khan went about what he did was unconstitutional. The fact that he used a justification that was not rooted in facts, right? The fact that he was basically saying that the reason why the no confidence vote can't take place is because the U.S. was colluding with the political opposition to push it through to oust him, and that therefore the loyalty clause could be invoked. That, I think, was the issue, the way he went about it. I should say it's important to acknowledge, and I think it's very important that Americans acknowledge that their governments have done some really nasty things in Pakistan and, of course, worldwide for a number of years in terms of instigating regime changes and meddling in internal politics. And, in Pakistan, you just have to go back a decade or so when the CIA worked with a Pakistani doctor to develop this fake vaccination campaign as part of the effort to track down Osama bin Laden. And we may say, well, the means justify the ends. It helped us get bin Laden, which is true. But I mean, that's extremely controversial. What happened? That the CIA did what it did. And I think that for many Pakistanis, that's something that no one will ever forget. And no matter where you are on the political, ideological spectrum, there was so much anger about how that went down that really, I think, hardened these views that the U.S. cannot be trusted and that it's always going to be a threat. It's always going to be meddling. You always have to watch out for CIA agents. They're everywhere. That type of mentality is going to be there. You couple that with what had been very unpopular policies, such as the drone war, which was very unpopular in Pakistan. It wasn't just Imran Khan. I mean, he was the most vociferous, articulate critic of drone strikes in Pakistan. Very unpopular. Most Pakistanis are also very unpopular with the U.S. War in Afghanistan, how that went down. Many Pakistanis believe that terrorism picked up in Pakistan itself only after that war started in Afghanistan, which is true to some extent, not completely though. But at any rate, my point being here is that there's a context and a history here that will make many Pakistanis, certainly those that are given to populist anti-American views, those that support Imran Khan, to believe that if they hear, and this we know is true now, that a senior U.S. official met with the Pakistani ambassador to Washington several weeks ago, and in which he basically was very critical of Imran Khan and said, well, we think that our relationship would be much better if he's voted out in the no confidence vote. If he survives, we may have to make some changes in our policies. It's not the most diplomatic thing to say, but it's basically just someone venting about the state of the relationship and his unhappiness with Imran Khan. But for many Pakistanis, that was essentially code for what could mean the precursor to some type of effort to oust the prime minister in the no confidence vote. So certainly, I mean, the political opposition in Pakistan thinks the allegation is absurd, but many do support it.
You talked about all the reasons that the relationship between the United States and Pakistan deteriorated over the last 20 years, a lot of them having to do with Afghanistan and the drone war that was conducted partially inside of Pakistan, the raid at Abbottabad, and so on. Another very crucial reason to this, which you alluded to earlier in the conversation, was the deepening ties between the United States and India, the historical rival of Pakistan since the 1940s. However, we've witnessed in the last several weeks many in the U.S. questioning the prospects for a alliance with India. You're starting to recognize the limits of where the U.S.-India partnership, which is not an alliance, can really go, partly because of the way India have been responding to the war in Ukraine. You also described how many in the establishment of Pakistan's military have indicated that they are interested in rebuilding ties with the United States, that they would like to get the relationship with the U.S. back on better footing. So amid these two different movements, do you sense that people in the U.S. side are starting to reconsider their attitudes and their approach to the two South Asian countries? Do you think that on one hand, seeing India's questionable alignment with the United States on the issues in Europe, and then on the other hand, seeing how Pakistan is eager to rebuild the U.S. relationship, do you sense that there might be a little bit of recalibration from the U.S. perspective in how we approach the two countries?
I do not think that there's going to be any thought of recalibrating the way in which the U.S. looks at its relationships with India and Pakistan. And, I think that the main reason comes down to the fact that U.S.-China competition has really become the prime concern, focus, priority of U.S. foreign policy and will be for quite some time, I think, regardless of how the war in Ukraine plays out. There's a very basic reality that Pakistan is China's closest ally. And if, U.S. foreign policy to a great extent revolves around trying to build up efforts, consensus, alliances, groupings to counter Chinese power, Pakistan is clearly the odd one out in that regard because it's a close ally of China. Whereas India, warts and all, despite all the issues there, and indeed, despite the fact that India remains unwilling to change its position of neutrality, if you want to call that, toward Russia, India is viewed in Washington, rightfully so, I think, as a key, from a strategic angle, a key partner because of its own concerns about China and its own willingness to work with the United States to counter that threat, even though indeed India is not willing to go so far as the U.S. would like it to go, particularly in terms of being willing to cooperate operationally with the United States. India does not want to become a traditional ally of the U.S. because its strategic autonomy principle does not allow for that. When it comes to the U.S. and Pakistan, there's just so much mistrust and baggage and bad blood from the past, going back a number of decades, not just the last 20 years, but going back to the last 40, 50 years. It's true that during the Cold War, the U.S. and Pakistan had this Cold War alliance. They worked closely together on many levels, but there was still a lot of disagreements and a lot of disputes. But, I would argue that if you look at how things were between the U.S. and Pakistan during a critical period between, say, 2011 and 2012, when it was very clear that the Pakistanis were openly backing and arming the Taliban insurgency and lying about it to the United States all the time. And at the same time, you had this quick succession of issues, of these crises, the Abbottabad raid, the fact that you had a CIA agent who opened fire and killed several Pakistanis, even though the Obama administration initially said he was not a CIA agent. And then, of course, the infamous Salalah raid, when you had NATO gunships attack and kill, I believe, about 24 Pakistani border troops. And there are many observers that believe that was actually an intentional strike. It was not accidental. So it's very hard for the relationship, even though so many years have gone by, to recover from all that. And then just looking at the very basic reality that for so many years, Pakistan had been backing America's enemies in Afghanistan, even though they were supposed to be working with the United States to target terrorists. Couple that with the fact that the Biden administration is comprised of many senior officials, including the president himself, who were working in the Obama administration at that particularly difficult time for U.S.-Pakistan relations, 2011, 2012. So I think another way you can look at it is that even if the Biden administration is frustrated with India's position on Russia, that the bigger issue is how there's so much bad blood and baggage and mistrust that's still there, that's still perceived, harbored by this administration toward Pakistan because of what happened in the past. That's going to impose a constraint on trying to refashion the relationship with Pakistan as well.
It's funny thinking about the overlap in personnel between the Obama administration and the current Biden administration. Michael, isn't there a famous quote from Obama where he was asked, "Mr. President, what keeps you awake at night? What do you lose sleep over?" And he said, "Just Pakistan."
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. He did say that indeed. That's also another famous quote came from Biden himself when he was vice president, in which he had told the Afghan president at the time, Hamid Karzai, he said that Pakistan is 50 times more important to us than Afghanistan is. Many Pakistanis took that as a compliment. But in fact, it was not a compliment. He was saying that Pakistan was so important to the U.S. because of concerns about, loose nukes and terrorists and things like that. So, I think you get a sense of how these folks have thought about Pakistan over the years.
And certainly, a country of 220 million people, fifth largest country in the world, with this close relationship with China that you alluded to, which was a strategic value to the U.S. It's on the coast. It has shipping. But on that note, just remarking on the significance of the country, I think is a good time to go to the audience questions. So we are going to go first to Royfield. After Royfield's question, we are going to go to Suhaib. So Royfield, over to you for the first question.
Yeah, thanks, John. Michael, it's been fascinating listening to you. Pakistan is a country which has fascinated me for a long time. Considering that the military has had this preponderance of dominance in Pakistani politics since independence, and this new constitution has only been around since 2010, if both elements can abide by the judgment of the Supreme Court and the military don't step in, doesn't this bode well for the military staying out of Pakistani politics in an overt way going forward? And isn't this kind of, a robust stress test of the Pakistani state and its relatively new constitution, which is only somewhat 12 years old?
Thanks for a great question. I agree it's a fascinating country. I would not call myself an expert on the country. I would always call myself a student because I feel I learn new, surprising things about it every day. But yeah, interesting point that you make. And I think that you're right. I had said before that one of the silver linings about Pakistani politics in recent years is that we have seen a continuous period of civilian rule where the military has stayed behind the barracks, so to speak. And indeed, if this current crisis plays out peacefully and you do have a peaceful transition leading to a new government, presumably through an early election, and the military does not take over, absolutely, I think that would be another feather in the cap of the Pakistani democratization process, for sure. Now, can we rule out any type of military takeover over the next few months? No, I think it's very unlikely. But I think that the only scenario under which that could happen is if, for whatever reason, things go awry, and say the Supreme Court makes a ruling and it's not obeyed, or there's no clear path for what's going to happen next in terms of when the elections are going to happen. Given how poisoned the political environment is now in Pakistan, given how hyper-partisan it is, it would not take much for there to be different political parties taking to the streets and protesting and those turning violent. And if that were to happen, and if you were to have violent political protests that are sustained over time, that's when you could certainly see the military stepping in, using the justification of the need to restore public order and stability and holding power until there can be early elections. That's the only scenario under which I can envision the military stepping back in. I'm somewhat cautiously optimistic that that won't happen.
Thank you very much, Royfield. We will go to Sohaib.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me here. My family's based in the capital, Islamabad. And I guess I'm biased. I'm an Imran Khan supporter. And most of what you said, I kind of agreed with. But the Pakistan has had to have a strong military, I think, historically, due to when the British ruled and what they left behind, conflict over Kashmir and things. I think that region became very militarized to protect itself. The development of nuclear weapons obviously happened as well. So the military has always been pretty strong in anything we know in kind of human behavior. When a power is strong, it sometimes lapses and takes control, which has happened in Pakistan's history. But I think in Pakistan's history, there's been a lack of leadership after Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founding father of Pakistan. And I see Imran Khan as someone who isn't from a political dynasty, someone who is honest to a degree, someone who is trying to bring about change and gives hope for the youth and the next generation. I think that's good for the global world, especially the West. I mean, just seeing kind of the growth in terms of tech startups I've seen in Pakistan has been amazing over the last year or two. Initiatives which have been very positive. And the problem is the opposition belongs to two of these legacy, these family type of systems, these dynasties, which are in it for kind of their own political gain, their own kind of personal familial gain. My question being, so do you think the West or America has any kind of threat from Imran Khan being on power, or do you think it's a benefit having kind of described kind of obviously Pakistan's strategic location like you did, the kind of the free thinking Imran Khan brings to Pakistan?
I agree with much of what you said. And I think that, getting to the issue of why Pakistan has had to have a powerful military, I would argue that civilian administrations have tended to be corrupt. As Imran Khan has argued, they have been corrupt, they've been inefficient, they've been ineffective. But I would argue that, the Imran Khan administration was ineffective for many of the same reasons, even if it wasn't nearly as corrupt as the previous civilian governments. There was just a lot of policy failures and weakness, and in this case, inexperience. This is someone who had never held national power before, a party that had never been in control nationally. That really caused problems, and I think arguably elevated the role of the military, which, as I had said before, Khan was willing to defer and let the military take on a prominent role, even more so than had been the case in previous civilian administrations. In terms of what the U.S. thinks about him being in power, certainly there's things that he has said about the U.S. that would not go down well here. I mean, the very sharp criticism of U.S. policy, which really been building up in recent weeks, has clearly not gone over well at all. But, something else I'll mention, which I think is an important point to make and gets to this issue of, the civilians versus the military in Pakistan. Historically, for many years, the U.S. has tended to privilege its relations with the Pakistani military over those of the civilian leaderships, which I think is a very bad thing for democracy in Pakistan. But that's what's happened. And, there's been a lot of unhappiness in Pakistan that Joe Biden was not willing to pick up the phone and call Imran Khan and have a chat with him. There has been plenty of high-level conversations between senior Biden administration officials and officials in Pakistan, but many times those officials are generals, including the army chief. There's sort of a running joke that Pakistan has a defense minister, but many people wouldn't be able to identify him just because the army chief is plays so much more of a role in defense policy, and you rarely have U.S. officials talking to the defense minister in Pakistan. They talk to generals. I just want to thank you, Justin, and also John, for hosting a terrific discussion. I really thank all of you tuning in. I would advise you all to continue to watch how things play out in Pakistan over the next few days. It really is a fascinating state of play. And indeed, I think one could argue that Pakistan really is an important country for the reasons that were mentioned. Its location serving as a gateway to Europe and the Middle East, its relations with countries like China and Russia and Saudi Arabia, and the fact that it is indeed a very young, populous country. And so what happens in Pakistan does matter to the United States, even if our relationship with Pakistan is not what it used to be.
That concludes today's conversation. Again, huge thanks to Michael Kugelman, to the Wilson Center, and most of all, to you for being here. As a reminder, like all of our episodes, this is an edited version of a longer conversation that was taped live with audience questions. For information on how to join us, please visit our website, pm101.live. Please also take a second to subscribe on whichever streaming service you're using right now, so you don't miss our next episode this Wednesday featuring Glenn Kirshner, who's a lawyer and former prosecutor in the Army. This has been Politics and Media 101, produced in partnership with Clubhouse. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for being a part of this community. I'm Jeff Browning. On behalf of Justin Higgins and John Gunnison, our co-founders, thank you very much for being here. We hope to hear from you soon.